Hello, in this video we're going to discuss advice to law enforcement agencies, the Black Lab Part 3, Social Isolation. So, as mentioned earlier, the implementation of social isolation. We'll continue with that. So the partner, spouse and siblings and family members are replaced. So the replacement involves either the people replaced with imposters, or they force some family members to become Wiccans and witches and help with the social isolation. They clutter the person's living environment with junk. Often they'll use a spouse to deliver this, and the victim is unable to do anything about it. And they fill the person's home with junk from somewhere else. Often some of that junk could be taken from victims associated with what witches and Wiccans are doing. Mental health intimidation and rape. So they have people inside the house that are offenders and that commit rape and force the person to suffer going through a mental health crisis when they're not having one. Okay, telepathy. This is a technology that's used for one purpose only on Earth, bullying. So that's the highest level of social isolation. There's mind separation and manipulation involved. They can turn down a person's inner thoughts and override them with their own voice. So this goes into the inner level of thought process and they override it. So if the person talking over it, it makes the victim think that that's their thoughts, it's not. And then they can manipulate people into doing stuff, thinking stuff, or believing stuff. They torment them constantly, and they'll always bring things up. The other thing is, it can be as simple as a Wiccan or a witch with a cell phone. That's telepathy. So a Wiccan or witch with a cell phone pays Bitcoin and receives an app for their phone through Caligula. And they have a selection of telepathic things they can do to a person, from as simple as a cough to as terrible as drown rape. In the case of drown rape, it is a recording of brain pattern modulation signatures of someone having that done to them, and then it is simply played back telepathically through the points in the brain, and the victim experiences all of it. Intimidation. So they're constantly intimidating them, telling them, oh, we're going to drown you, we're going to rape you, that sort of thing. And telling them to do stuff, or forcing them to do stuff that they wouldn't normally do. And to behave erratically. Heckling happens all the time. So if something goes horribly wrong for the victim, the telepaths are there. They are there all the time and heckle them, and then they remind them later. So that's the thing about telepathy. They're there all the time. They're constantly reminding the person of a bad experience, and that can include post-traumatic stress from something. And normally it's the Wiccans and witches who are responsible for the traumatic event in the first place. Sickness, injuries, shortness of breath. So the way in which telepathy is used is there's a supercomputer that is connected to equipment that connects to the brain, and inside the computer is recordings of the brain pattern signature modulation under many different types of experiences. And for example, burning to death, they can just select burning to death and play it back. And a person who died who was connected telepathically to the hub, that that recording can be played back to them. You could be anywhere, even driving your car. Suddenly the person is experiencing being burned to death. Sickness, they can play the tape and the person can be sick, really, really sick. They can also have an app on their phone, vomit. So they can push a button on their phone, and that triggers the telepath to have to look at a button and press it, which makes them vomit and the victim vomit. Shortness of breath, they can turn this on and leave it going for hours or days, and the victim cannot breathe properly at all. Rape, drown rape, and entropy rape and torture. So the way in which telepathy works, they have a person who's a telepath who's connected through the hub to the symbiote, and the telepath has a selection of options inside a heads-up display. They select the option inside their imagination. There's a box, they select it, it's a number, and then intensity is through the alphabet, A to Z. A being the least powerful, Z, Y being the worst. Z is something that actually prevents the telepath from experiencing what the symbiote experiences. So they press Z so they don't experience it, and then they push D for something like a headache. Telepath doesn't get a headache, he pretends to have one while the victim has a massive headache. Just remember they can take it up to X or Y, which would be excruciating. And someone with a cell phone texts them, then they select it, and that's how it's done. In order to relay telepathic data, they have relays. So it's very small and sneaky. And they have vehicles that follow people around that implement this. But the process of telepathy is hideous and involves people being experimented on in the first place. Entropy is where the telepath experiences something and passes that entire experience to the victim. So they could do something to the telepath, for example rape them or torture them, burn them with something, and the victim will experience all of it. It's like the victim is in the room and is the person being tortured. Sleep deprivation, they can prevent the victim from sleeping, and they do this constantly while heckling them the whole time. Alright, chemical. So with chemical, what happens is they have a chemical pack dispenser which straps onto the body in a place where no one would look. It can be on an arm, but normally it's around the thigh, the upper thigh. And it has a auto injector, an auto dispenser that has an IV drip type way of implementing the chemical, and it's done. It's covered with something that makes it look like normal skin, so it's very hard to detect. And with chemical, they can give them chemical depression, anxiety, sleep deprivation, or in other words they keep them awake all the time. They can give them excruciating pain and torture them with it. Again, Witch or Wiccan with a cell phone can control the chemical pack and make that person feel what they want them to feel. They also use a script for both telepathy and all of this, and the script has to be has to go through their hierarchy before it is implemented and then delivered to the victim. And that can involve vehicles with number plates with words, and the telepath makes the victim look at the number plate and then says to them something associated with the script, or does something associated with the script, and the victim experiences it. So replacement of and loss of favorite items. So when they clutter a person's house, they can hide stuff in there, or they just take it out the door, and it'll turn up somewhere else where you're not expecting it. For example, if someone's a truck driver and they get into their truck and suddenly behind the seat they find something from their house and they don't understand how it got there. Right? So the handler took it and the victim's not aware of it, and the handler placed it inside the vehicle. I'm the Archangel Daniel, and I'm from heaven.